My guest today is Stephen Schettini.
My father was a lion tamer. My mother was an acrobatic dancer in Circus, which was very big in England and Europe at the time. I was in college. I did 4 years of social science, much of that time reading Karl Marx, and then moving on to Alan Watts, and then starting to read the Buddha. And I saw some Tibetan texts, which were beginning to be translated back then. And the Tibetan texts were really interesting. The imagery was like really gripping. I got to the end of my 4 years and I left. I gave it up. I was convinced by now I needed to do something like my dad and mum. So I did. I started hitchhiking. I'm not a guru. I share my past. I share my own failings, my weaknesses, but I also share the fact that I'm growing, that I've learned from it, that that's what this is for. It's for getting better, not for getting perfect. 99% of what we're doing is unconscious. The mind begins by regulating your heartbeat, your immune system, your circulatory, all that stuff. And all this is unconscious, thank God. We can go from birth to death, more or less unconscious. We have to choose to be conscious. And if you go expecting that of people, you're going to be very disappointed, because most people don't choose that. They choose the easy way. They look around. What's everyone else doing? That's what I'm going to do. They don't think for themselves.
They choose the norm.
They choose the norm because it's safe.
Yes, that's what we want to break. Welcome to Compassiviste Dialogues. I'm your host, Ali Horiad. My goal in this program is to educate our audience about various global issues and how we can help. My guest today is Stephen Schettini, a mindfulness teacher, author, TEDx speaker, and most interestingly, actually two most interesting things. One, former Buddhist monk who brings ancient wisdom into the modern world. And the second is Stephen's journey, because he was born to circus parents, something I want to hear a little bit more about. And he struggled to fit in and eventually left everything behind, hitchhiking through India in search of answers. He became a Buddhist monk, immersing himself in monastic life for 8 years before stepping away to forge a non-religious, evidence-based approach to mindfulness. His work today is about helping people navigate life's chaos with clarity and self-awareness, cutting through illusions, delusions, and emotional turmoil to make better choices. With a sharp mind, scientific lens, and a heart for teaching, he challenges us to rethink mindfulness, spirituality, and what it truly means to live with awareness and have purpose. Hello, Stephen, and welcome to Compassiviste Dialogues.
Hello, Ali. Thank you very much for having me.
You're most welcome. This is going to be interesting because we're going to work through how you went through religion to get to answers. So that's part of my things that I'm mostly interested about. But let's start with childhood and the circus. Tell us a little bit about, you're born, you grew up, and all the way to trying India.
Okay. So I was born into a restaurant. My parents had formed a restaurant. They were in the circus before I was born. But it was just before the war. My father was a lion tamer. My mother was an acrobatic dancer in Circus, which was very big in England and Europe at the time. And so I didn't know this. I didn't know them when they were there. All I knew was that at the bottom of the stairs in the big closet, there was a suitcase full of pictures, just loose pictures. And, it was dad in the ring with the lions and mom on the trapeze and all this stuff. And this was so interesting to me. And these were my parents. These were my real parents. Okay. The ones out there were they were like irritating, but these were the real ones. And I guess my mind, I'm still trying to understand what that did to me, but it made me feel that, first of all, I could do whatever I wanted with my life, that the world was open. Like it was up to me to choose. I didn't have to obey convention. In fact, I really should be a little bit eccentric, or maybe even a lot. So that opened the doors for me to look and aspire to anything I wanted. Same time, I was with my dad, who had left the church when he was in the circus. He came back to it afterwards when he became a family man. He came back to it with a passion, and he went right down the rabbit hole. You know, we had pictures of the Pope, and we had crucifixes everywhere, and we had to go to church on Sunday, or we could leave the home and find our own place to live. You know, that was the choice. So it was shoved down my throat. I was schooled by Catholic nuns, primary school, and Catholic monks in my secondary school. And one thing that the nuns actually managed to get into my head was the idea that you had to believe in something. So many, many years later, when I decided I wasn't going to be a Catholic, as soon as I left home, I went up to London to college, and I just stopped going to church. I didn't realize at the time I was looking for something else. And I went through all sorts of things, communism, socialism, occult stuff, and then spirituality. And I got there. And then I started exploring that, and Buddhism came into it. Alan Watts was a great influence back in those days. It's for many of us, not just me. So when I left Christianity, I left Catholicism, the institution, I still had a good opinion of Jesus. Jesus is still one of my heroes now. At least the story of Jesus. I don't know if he existed or not, maybe not. But the story, the myth, I think is powerful. And I love him in that sense. But the church, different thing. So I was looking for something else that would sustain me. I thought that I needed beliefs to sustain me. I needed a system, okay, which many of us do. It's very common. There are many people, like especially more fundamentalist Christians, especially, who think that if you don't believe, you can't have a moral foundation, which is just awful. I mean, couldn't be more wrong. Anyway, so I was in college. I did 4 years of social science, much of that time reading Karl Marx, and then moving on to Alan Watts, and then starting to read the Buddha. And I saw some Tibetan texts, which were beginning to be translated back then. And the Tibetan texts were really interesting. The imagery was like really gripping. And I got to the end of my 4 years, and I left. I gave it up. I realized 4 years, okay, I'm going to graduate in a few months, and I'm going to become a social scientist, and I'm going to get employed by some city council in the Midlands. And there was a feeling of dread which just crept into my heart. I just couldn't face it. I was convinced by now I needed to do something like my dad and mum, you know? So I did. I went off to India. I scraped together £300, and I started hitchhiking. My mother literally dropped me off on the side of the M4 in England, and she waved goodbye. She sat there in the car and waited until I was picked up. Yeah. She never stopped talking about that. My mother never stopped talking about the circus either. She was like that. She gave me lots and lots of stories. And that really convinced me that this is the most fundamental unit of communication is the story. Okay. I imagine our ancestors sitting around the campfire talking. Why? Well, they had to get food and they had to agree on stuff to do. But then what? In their leisure time, they told stories. They communicated. They made themselves a society. And we are so social, we can't even imagine what it's like not to be. And I tried not to be. I tried to be alone. It was a disaster. It was not what I expected at all. So that's what happened when I left England. I started looking with all this idealism and all this enthusiasm. And after a while, as you probably know, when you're traveling, when you're literally traveling, like going from place to place day after day, it becomes exhausting, pointless. And you start thinking, well, what the hell am I doing? And you start losing your bearings. And by this time, I was in North Pakistan looking for solitude. I needed to get away from people because people were the problem. Okay? That's the way I saw it back then. And I found my solitude, and it was not what I expected. But I was in this tiny little village in North Pakistan in the Swat Valley. And there was a little pharmacy in there which you could buy anything you want, including they had vials of German morphine. So I started buying the morphine, and that sort of got me by from day to day. And there was a young woman who lived nearby. She was Danish, and she'd been living there for years. And I'm not sure how she was making a living, but I don't think it was very wholesome, and I don't think it was very good. But she had befriended me. It was just friendship. But when she heard about me up here, she came up to the village I was staying in. She came storming into my room. She grabbed my gear, threw it out the window, and she forced me to well, anyway, somehow she used her charms or her guilt to get me out of there right then and on the back of a truck, down the valley and out. She said, go to the Tibetans. 3 days later, I was there. And they welcomed me with open arms. Mm-hmm. These were brand new refugees. They hadn't even been there for 10 years. Their whole culture was being decimated by the Chinese. And they were desperate to preserve their culture, and they wanted to pass it on to anyone who would listen. And so they opened the Tibetan Works of Library and Archives in Dharamsala. And I went there and I met all sorts of other Westerners who were also interested. There were classes every day. Mm-hmm. It was great. And I was welcomed. I belonged. And this was the first time I felt that sense of belonging. I tried to feel it as a kid with the Catholics, but I never could fit in. I was always asking awkward questions and I was always being punished. But this was completely different. They wanted to give me everything. They wanted to, and the teaching, instead of telling me, you should be good, you're a bad boy, which is what I'd heard all my life. They said, look, this is good and that's bad. How do you get from here to there? We have a method. That really opened my eyes. So actually it is possible. You can change. So that's what gripped me. And the philosophy was delightful and the language was wonderful. And so I spent the next 8 years doing all this. I learned the language. I learned the philosophy, learned to debate. I learned a lot about Buddhism. Very, very little about Buddha. Interesting. I had to go off and figure that out by myself. Because Buddhism is a body of knowledge which is built up over 2,400 years. It's vast, it's huge. And you can spend your whole life studying it. And it's quite interesting and it's sort of delightful. And I felt very clever, when I mastered all the Madhyamika and I could understand the different stages, different ways of interpreting existence. But it was all theoretical. And eventually I got to the point where I realized, not enough. I haven't changed. I'm still the same. I'm still impulsive. I'm still reactive. I still get depressed. I got really poor social skills. I grew up with very poor social skills. In survival mode to a great extent, because my dad used to beat me when I was a kid. And I think that's what put me into that survival mode. And when you're in survival, you can't be empathic. It's very hard to be compassionate because you're focused on just, staying upright. So the end of my career with the Tibetans was probably the most painful thing and most difficult thing I ever did. I had no money and I had no money skills either. So when I left, it was extremely difficult. But I had a friend in Montreal in Canada who said, if you want to make a start, come over and I'll give you a hand. So I came over. He had a job waiting for me. I started working. I could tell you about the job. It was pretty gruesome. I was a pen shooter, or I was trying to be. Do you know what that is?
Tell us.
It's a scam. Okay, you go in an office and you call these people, usually on the other side of the country, and you sell them 200 pens with their business name inscribed on it, and they're worth like $5, and you charge them $200. And so you got a room full of people lying their heads off. And I came in there and I was supposed to follow suit, and I couldn't do it. I was not just useless. it was wrong. I just couldn't do it. But anyway, that was my introduction to life on the outside. And from there, I managed to get a job as an English teacher in an English school, which was much more palatable. And then it was 1980. First microcomputers were coming out. So I bought one. I taught myself how to use it. Then I started writing user manuals for computers because they were so badly written. And then I built a career from that. A job. My career, I'd already established. I was in this business. I didn't know how to call it. I didn't know how to describe it. I certainly didn't know how to market it or market myself. But I knew that I had made this commitment. When I left the monastery, my preceptor, Geshe Rabten, he said, okay, so you want to disrobe? You can disrobe. But just remember, once a monk, always a monk. And I thought he was just saying that. But he was sort of right, because that monk is still in here. And my first blog was called The Naked Monk. And now I'm the inner monk. But I still identify with that. My best friend in Montreal, he calls me monk. He doesn't call me Stephen. Mm-hmm. Mr. Monk sometimes. So that whole attitude is there. That whole preoccupation, that direction in my life is all about mind training. Mm-hmm. That's the way I could call it. I very rarely use the word spirituality. I started off with the word mindfulness because it seemed quite helpful, useful back in the 90s. But now the same as the word spirituality, it means pretty well anything to anyone now. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to avoid that. I try to use ordinary language. I've always avoided the terminology of Buddhism, which is really heavy. I avoid that completely. But I've learnt a lot on Buddhist, on the structure, the way the Buddha actually taught. And that served me very well. So that's what I'm doing now. I teach not in a theoretical way. I teach in a practical way. So I do that by, for many years I was teaching 10-week courses. I do 3 or 4 a year. And I'd have people come, and it was very successful. It was very enjoyable and everything. But at the end of those 10 weeks, they'd say, well, now what? I said, well, just a few more weeks, and then you come for the next 10 weeks. But I realized the big problem with meditation and mindfulness and mind training and self-development, whatever you want to call it, the big problem is keeping up the practice. It's not difficult to understand. Everybody who goes on a mindfulness retreat loves it. Oh, this is fabulous. It's the best thing I've ever, but they don't do it. Mm-hmm. And it's, they kick themselves. It's not a matter of blame or, they just don't do it because you need support. You really do. So I realized I'm going to set up a support system. So I called it Mindfulness Live, and I teach 3 times a week. It's only half an hour, mm-hmm. but you have 3 sessions a week, and that becomes the backbone of your work. And plus you're introduced to a small community of people who, like-minded. And so the people who come to that are really, really committed. They're committing to coming 3 times a week, which is cool. A lot of people don't do it. Fine. But if you do, these people are strong. They're cool. And, I'm really building a tribe here, which is fantastic. Mm-hmm. I'm not a guru. I make that very clear. I understand that people are looking for gurus and they project that into you. And I'm very wary of that. And so I share my past. I share my own failings, my weaknesses, but I also share the fact that I'm growing, that I've learned from it. Mm-hmm. That's what this is for. It's for getting better, not for getting perfect. And that's where I'm at today.
Okay. I'm going to break down a lot of what you said into getting more detailed with your answers. First of all, I appreciate when you say one of your heroes is still Jesus, or the myth of Jesus, or however we want to acknowledge that history. And I often say the same thing. And a lot of your life and the path of your life is very similar to mine. I feel like I was a few decades later, in very, not exactly the same ways, but very parallel. Now, I often, give the example of Moses in some of the activism discussions that I have. And I say, it doesn't matter if you think it was a myth and, all the stuff that is, in the books are myths, but, they teach it like it actually happened. And there were witnesses there to see those things, to see the staff turn into magic and all those things. Like, they teach it literally verbatim. This happened. Whereas maybe it did, maybe it didn't. I don't know. But the point is, there are lessons to be learned here from the stories, from the fables, or from the actual stories, however you want to put it. And you referenced that with Jesus as well. And I love that you say that, because often the arguments become, is that true? Did that happen? And people forget the actual lesson of that, which is far from the argument, right? And even within the same religion, you have Muslims sitting there and arguing about a specific date and a specific battle and what two people said in that battle. And I said, no, how about we focus on the actual, the storyline here and the theme, and let's just try to activate that, right? Let's make that real. So I like that you say that. And you said something that interests me in the beginning was you said you studied a lot of Karl Marx. Do you think that Karl Marx was a modern day communist?
No, he wouldn't know what that means, I don't think.
God bless you.
He was an idealist. Huh?
God bless you, because that's another thing I'm trying to tell the world is Marx is often shunned because the Western world equates him as the father of communism, so to speak, in the same way they equate Adam Smith to capitalism. And I say both of them you're wrong on, because Adam Smith was saying, let's activate and give people the means through which they can benefit the whole. If somebody needs an investment for their amazing cancer cure to cure everybody, let's give them the investment so they can cure cancer, right? But it wasn't about the pharmaceuticals. It was about the actual project to make the world a better place, the society a better place. And I think Marx was looking at the same thing from a different angle, but none of them were, USSR communism or United States capitalism today.
Yeah. No, he's been made into a boogeyman.
Yeah. Right. So tell me a little why you think that.
Why he's been made into a boogeyman?
Yeah, why and what you think he really wanted to say from, let's take his famous, because a lot of people, they probably haven't read Das Kapital or anything like that. But I mean, the average public, at least, they've seen, the little 30-page Communist Manifesto. So they learn terms that he used and whatnot, and they use comrade and proletariat and things like that. But what do you make of what Marx was trying to do and how it got destroyed?
Well, first of all, let's separate those two books. First of all, Das Kapital is one of the most boring books ever written. Chapter by chapter analysis of different micro aspects of capitalism and how it works. It's not a manifesto in any way. There's no moral judgment in there at all. It's purely mechanistic. This is how it works. And it's a masterpiece in its own way, but it's, you can't read it. not from cover to cover. The manifesto.
I did a whole course on that.
Did you really?
Yes, because
oh my God.
I did my first degree in economics, and then I did my second undergrad in philosophy, and then I did my first master's in philosophy, political philosophy, which led to my second master's in political science. And then from there, I did an MBA, and then from there, I did postgraduate studies in international relations and conflict resolution and religion. And so a lot of these things tie together, right? I mean, the philosophy, the politics, the economics, and all that. And I will get to something you said about economics that was really interesting as well. But with Karl Marx, that's why I was saying, people don't see his kind of expose of what capitalism is, but they do see the activist call in just a few pages that really, turned the world on its head. But it was used irresponsibly.
The manifesto is a masterpiece of communication. Yes. It's you can't. It's almost impossible to read it without just falling right into it. And I wonder what Marx would make of that today. But anyway, Marx didn't really write that. That was more of Engels' work, for sure. He was that sort of.
I think
translator.
Yes, it was. But I also think the idea of the abuse and the oppression and the inequality of society was what Marx was trying to really present to the world.
Well, all the social scientists at that time were doing that. That was what they were all trying to do. Adam Smith as well. I mean, it was all about improving the lot of society, of the poor, of working people. And we somehow took that and
and created the destructive mechanisms that we did with it. I think.
Well, he talked about revolution. I mean, they did advocate revolution. They did expect a violent revolution.
Yes.
Which didn't happen. I think that if Marx came back today, I think what would interest him most, what would fascinate him, is socialist democracies.
Mm-hmm.
He'd be looking at that because he didn't anticipate that at all. To him, it was black or white. It was like socialism or capitalism.
Yes.
Or the dictatorship of the proletariat in between. But we saw what that became. In every case, it became a dictatorship.
Yeah,
of one
it became
man.
an oligarchic dictatorship, essentially. In every which way they cut it. And then it grew into capitalism like China. Because somehow China still flags, is waving the flag of communism. But I don't know if China is a communist, what is the U.S., right? That's what I tell people. What do you call the U.S.? That's got to be some extreme form of communism if China's a communist country, right?
Today, I think we've gotten caught up too much in the problem of left and right. And that's not the issue. The issue is the center and the extremes.
Yes, the dualism that they throw people into.
The left has lost it too, in many ways.
Yes, and you're absolutely right. I've said that too. I think, I speak with people on the left, and they are not prepared to be inclusive. They're not prepared to see other views. They're not prepared to accept. They're not prepared to, they think they're, we're opening the world up. We're giving rights. We're giving freedoms and liberties. We're accepting everybody and yet such and such. And then when you confront them about their shortcomings, they just get angry. And they're not willing to communicate. So I tell them, I say, well, how different are you from the far right? But on the other extreme, where is that middle ground that you are promoting that I don't see, so to speak? So I was very interested in your explanation of Marx, and I think a lot of those ideas during that era, even how we've kind of tied a lot of people, at least, have tied Nietzsche to Hitler and the influences and stuff, which I don't also see there either. But I mean, we've done that. Now, the other thing I wanted to ask you that you said early on is you saw a lot of theory and no reality. And the reason why I went into philosophy from economics is because when I went into economics, all I kept seeing, and I was in macroeconomics, so it was more theoretical than microeconomics, much more. And in macro, all I saw was if we hold these things constant and we change this, then this happens. And I say, well, when in the world is this going to ever happen? Or when in the world can we control something by that extent? Like, give me the realistic version of this. And so I got slowly branded, and I was in a very leftist school, and I got slowly branded as a realist. And that was like, a very dirty word to use in a leftist school, right? So, Ali became a realist. And so I thought, you know what, maybe I can't think too deep. Maybe I need to study the pillars of thought. So that's what drove me to philosophy. But then in philosophy, I learned how to further fantasize in theory and how to even argue it in a way that perfects it, right? I mean, I could argue that it's daytime in the middle of the night because I had learned how to do that through philosophy in a professional manner, right? And then when this went higher into master's levels and even higher than that, it just became a tool that I realized all I'm learning here is to present my argument in further fortified manners by using better, kind of like being a lawyer with a lot of experience at some point, right? You're going to win the case just because of the breadth of experience that you bring with you after 40 years of law, for example, versus somebody who just came out of school. And that was what was happening. So I was starting to get upset with the fact that there was nothing real in what I was learning. You were smart. You left right before graduating. You said, you quit and you left. And that was very intelligent because I think a lot of people who quit school early are three types. One, life gets worse after that because they cannot manage the discipline that school gives, essentially. Two, they're going somewhere that they know, kind of like, Bill Gates drops out of school or Mark Zuckerberg drops out of school because they have something that they're working on. They're focused on it. They know where it's going. They don't need the schooling. They're onto something. So they follow that, whatever that causes. It could be, I mentioned those two people, but it's not always financial. It could be music. It could be anything. It could be a form of art that you quit for. But you find something within you that really drives you. And you quit everything you're doing for that drive. The third way is what you did and what I was scared to do in the beginning because I kept staying in school longer and longer. I was in school for, 11 years. I mean, I could have been a surgeon by the time I graduated had I gone to med school. I could have been a brain surgeon with the same amount of years in education. But I was always looking for answers. And even when I did religion at the highest level of, our schooling system, I graduated, I got the papers and everything and all the certificates and diplomas and degrees, but I didn't learn anything, really. That all came a lot later. So how were you able to leave school, realize that it's not giving you the tangible that you're looking for and activate you, and then go into 8 years in Buddhism, like in Tibet? And a lot of people, you could relate this to the film 7 Years in Tibet, like look at that and kind of take into account Stephen's life as even an extra year and a further layer into the culture, like many movies that we can imagine, because not a lot of people have lived that. I mean, I've traveled through India through the path that you actually mentioned, to the northern borders, in Kashmir and everything, and over to Tibet and Nepal and all that. But not a lot of people have. So through movies, you can just relate to people going in and embracing a culture, kind of like, I forget the name, but even Tom Cruise, Last Samurai, that was the film. There you go. He embraces a culture in that film as well. So you went and for 8 years, you embraced the culture and you became this new identity, right? But even then, you really said, no, something's missing here too. No matter how many years I've spent here, something's missing here too. And you still left and went on to find something. And I think what I did after all the years and quitting my life and restarting was finding Compassiviste, which is basically activating compassion. It's a word I put together to mean that, because there isn't such a word, in our language, in our usage. And I really wanted it to be something people can use as an adjective for themselves. So when you ask someone, what are you, or what do you see yourself as, and you could start saying, I'm a compassiviste, in the sense that I act on the guide of mindfulness and compassion, right? And essentially that's what you do. I mean, it's what you're doing is giving people the tools of reaching that point where they can activate through that mechanism. And I think, I don't know this for sure because I haven't taken your course, I'm not going to lie, but I think one of the things that led me to this, and this is where I want you to come in because you know this a lot more than I do, the modular mind. If we can kind of use
modular mind,
the Buddhist concept of the modular mind and neuroscience today, if we take the way the mind operates in modules, right? Competing thought processes by habit or environment or whatever behavioral or whatever affects us. Do you think that we can kind of become so grounded in ourselves or so mindful that we can have a constant module take over, as in mindful or compassion, so that we can continuously make the decisions that don't harm everything we do through our actions? Do you think that's one of the things that we could start taking into account in our lives?
To reach that a stable state of mind in which we're permanently compassionate and mindful and caring? No. I'd like to, but no, I don't think we can.
But is that what enlightenment becomes? Like when you reach?
Well, that's how enlightenment is sold.
Yes.
It's pitched.
Yes, I know it's pitched that way.
Those monks, they haven't got any money and all that stuff, but they're marketers. They are selling something that they passionately believe in, and they think you must have, otherwise your life is meaningless. And they'll do anything to make you believe it. And they'll tell all sorts of stories about Buddha flying through the air and seeing into the past and the future. And all that does in the end is it makes the Buddha inaccessible. Mm-hmm. And that was probably the biggest reason that I had to leave, because I couldn't relate to that anymore.
But all religions do that.
Yeah, I mean,
Jesus has stories like that. Moses has stories. And we just went through the Moses story. I mean, the staff and Muhammad has those. Everybody has these stories that distance them from a human. And I think the beauty of it is to show people that these were humans just like us.
Yeah.
Right. And look at what they were able to achieve. That is so much more miraculous and powerful for me than the reality, even if it's a reality of an alien coming down and having some super advanced technology and powers and being able to do things that I don't have the technology for, because I'll never be able to achieve that. If an alien comes in and they can think and print money just by thought, I'll never be able to do that. So, I'm sorry, I can't be you. Right. But if the alien shows up and is no different to me and it's able to be happy or to, bring goodness to the world, I look at them and I say, hey, if they can do it, I can do it. And it brings me so much closer to Buddha, to Jesus, to all my heroes, to Martin Luther King, to, I look at them and say, Martin Luther King was nobody special in the sense that he wasn't the son of a billionaire who had all this marketing access and the government, or he wasn't an Elon Musk figure coming into the government. He was somebody who really had to struggle to make the changes that he did, or Gandhi, for example. So when I look at them and I think to their biographies and their histories that these were regular people, that really drives me because I feel I can, right? So do you believe in the modular mind?
I'm not sure what you mean by the modular mind.
Well, that the mind works in modules. How do you believe the mind works? So maybe that's a better question to start.
How does the mind work?
Yeah, how does the mind work?
Oh, all right. So it all starts in the body with the 5 senses. And that gives us our basic data, basic information, our location in space, our orientation, and what we have to deal with. And we have a basic choice. Is this good? Is this edible? Is this safe? Is this nurturing? Or is it the opposite? Do I approach it or do I retreat? Or is it something I can ignore and move on to the next question? So that's the beginning of mind. I think an amoeba has that. Mm-hmm. Now, it's not just, in Buddhism, there's this idea of bare attention. Mm-hmm. In other words, you allow your awareness of those sensations without any processing. In my experience, in my practice, in my meditation, I've come to the conclusion that that's really not possible. That as soon as there's a sensation, there's some sort of, this is good, this is bad, I don't like this. There's always some immediate response to that. And that's what mind is. You can't separate that.
So let me break this down to simpler terms so I understand what you're saying. I'm meditating. I'm in a completely different world in my meditation. And this concept, even, for example, in Islam, there are stories where, there was a battle, people were wounded, and they need to pull a piece of metal or something from a soldier, and they didn't have morphine back then. So what they would do to numb them is they would go into prayer, which was their form of meditation, right? And in that prayer, they would get so lost in the prayer that they would not feel the pain and react to the pain of the surgery, right? Okay. So this, or for example, the story of Abraham in the fire, when he gets thrown into the fire and he comes out unscathed, but his brother goes in and he dies because he didn't have the same meditative state. These are sold to us in that way. But I think anybody who walks into the fire will burn, or will feel the sensation of burning. But then what again brings me back to this question of how much power do I really have over the reality of the physical is I see a monk set fire to himself, and he's sitting cross-legged in the fire, not screaming, burning and dying. And he can have the power to do that. But if I touch the stove and it's just a tad warm, I start flipping around the whole kitchen. So I don't have that control over my own sensory reactions. So what I'm trying to say in the modular mind is this. If Ali can always touch the stove and be in such control that the automatic reaction is not to pull his arm away or to escape or walk away from the pain, but to embrace the pain and say, this is part of the experience, then I have full control over my mind. And then maybe I have so much control in the metaphysical way that I can maybe even numb that pain, like the monk did when right? Where am I wrong here? What am I saying that's wrong?
When you say you have full control over your mind, you don't. You have control over your mind in that event, in that particular thing, in that moment. You don't have full control over your mind. That's a very grand statement.
It is. So you can never have that. You
I don't
always
think so,
fail,
because
basically.
your mind is not yours to command.
Perfect.
I hate to tell you this.
Okay, explain this concept. Your mind is not yours to command.
Yeah.
Let's open that
Well,
up.
let's see, we're walking down the street and you're walking one way, I'm walking the other way. I look you in the eye and I say, you're an idiot. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
You're going to react to that. And it's going to be partly your choice, but you have to deal with an event which is outside of your mind and outside of your control. And you don't always know.
Because of your actions, you mean?
Well,
regardless of
if I succeed in triggering something, yeah.
Right, but even if you don't succeed
with family.
Right. No, but even if you don't succeed in triggering, maybe I'm so calm and so in control of my reactions that I say, you know what, maybe he's having a bad day, just let him say what he wants, I'll keep walking. That's still my control. But you may say, hey, that didn't trigger him, I'm going to throw a punch. And then I have to react to that, right? So I have to
we're getting distracted. I'm not talking about you. You don't necessarily have to be negative. But even if you're positive, even if you turn on your compassion, that's triggered by me.
Yeah,
that's triggered by the encounter.
Reacting to something.
No, but it's not triggered by my intention, but by the act, the fact itself. So your mind is not just something that you decide; it also responds to the world around you, and
yes,
you're dependent. Yes. You're dependent on
so maybe I said
data.
Okay, let's go back a step. I used all the wrong words. I meant what you're saying, but I used all the wrong words. So let me give you an example. Maybe it can make sense. I've used this example before, so you're the best person to tell me if this is right. What I sometimes think of as this point of, because I use not Buddhism, but Buddha, in the sense that I try to understand this space of enlightenment, not space, but this reach to enlightenment. And I try to understand it in the sense of just being in this just frictionless flow with nature, like just being one with the universe. That's the way I understand it, okay? And not to get too philosophical, but I think this is what it means to me. So you and I are walking in Montreal, and we walk into an independent shoe store, and the owner's there, and I see a pair of shoes, and there's a scratch on it, and my modular mind will work this way. That's my reaction. I see the scratch on the shoe. What do I first think of? Hey, maybe I can get a discount on this because it's got a scratch. So that's me reacting to the shoe, right? And I say, hey, would you give me a discount on it? Now, I think, for example, if I have what I called full control, let's just say a lot of control over my mind, I may think, no, Ali, don't be capitalist in your thinking, because maybe the owner of the store relies on these prices and these sales to feed their family, to keep the business going and all these other things. And maybe that $15 that you're going to get less is not really that important. It's not going to kill you. So don't bargain just for the purpose of bargaining, right? And do you really need the pair of shoes anyways? And all these other beautiful thoughts. But bottom line is, one direction of this conversation goes to my economic mind, my capitalist mind that comes in. That's a module, capitalism, I call it.
Oh, I see what you
mean.
Okay.
And the other module is compassion. Yeah. Think about the other person in the deal, so to speak. Let's make it the most blessed way of dealing together, so everybody gains maximally together. That's a balance, right? Now, in the midst of all of this, the door opens and a lion walks in. All three of us are going to think running away or finding some way to kind of, distract the lion or fight the lion. Whatever we're thinking, it's kind of staying alive, right? We're trying to stay alive here with the lion's presence. I have options. I may be evil in my option, and in the case of keeping myself alive, I might push you in front of the lion. And, the lion's reaction is, oh, he's right in front of me. I'm just going to start biting. And then that gives me more time to run away. That's an option. Right. Yeah. The other option is, for us to collectively think, what's the best way to get out of here? And the owner may say, run towards the back and we'll shut the door. Right. And we collectively try to escape together. The third, maybe we're all brave and we say, hey, each person grab a rod from the ground and let's attack the lion. Right. And then the fourth one, which generally doesn't come up, is this lion has to eat. What if I'm the meal today? Can I overcome myself in the sense of my future, my life, my aspirations, all of what I want to do with my life to become food and just lay there, right? Which one is compassion? Which one is the right path? So I think when you reach that level of being able to not panic and very calmly, without some friction, so to speak, flow into these, resolves of continuous triggers, as you placed it in your example, I reach a place where you're unbothered, to use a simple word, which is something that Buddha kind of tries to get at, right? To be unbothered. And I keep thinking to myself, how do I use this modular system to train myself to continuously use the module that keeps me at that elevated, compassionate, unbothered state? Does it make sense now?
I understand what you're saying. Yeah,
thank you.
It's. Okay. I think it's much more complicated than what the Buddha was presenting. In
a good way or a bad way?
It's just complicated.
Okay.
Well, let me continue what I was saying before about the origin of mind.
Okay, let's go there.
Because I'm going to make a point from that. So you have this data coming into your body. Your mind starts to react. Initially, it's all brainstem stuff. It's animal reactivity, right? Defensiveness and so on. And so there's the upper mind. Okay, there's the cerebral cortex. There's thought and understanding and processed experience and so on. So let's look at a newborn baby. They've got none of that. All they've got is attention. There's nothing more mindful than a newborn baby. Just look into his face. He's exploring. He's figuring out how his fingers work, how his toes work, how he can reach, how he can look. I mean, this is really basic stuff. So this is the preoccupation. And then gradually the child accumulates knowledge and experience and learns. Now, learning is a process of automaticity. Okay, remember when you learned the alphabet? The first time you wrote the letter A, it took you like 5 seconds and it was all beaten out of shape. So gradually your mind automates that process and you figure it out, body and mind. It's not just your mind. And you don't have to think about it. You have to practice it. That's how you learn
Repetition.
It. And then it becomes automated. That goes for everything, including our emotional processing. We learn something. My father hit me as a kid. I learned to be afraid. I learned to live with fear. I learned to bully other people in order to compensate for it. This was the pattern that I learned that enabled me to survive in that way. And that pattern, as I went through life, became, it was exercised again and again. And so it became stronger and stronger. And that was what I had to deal with. It was when I realized that those states of mind were were carrying me down, were dragging me down, that's when I realized I need something. I need to look for something. I need to find a way to manage this. So I went to Buddhism. And so what I got from Buddhism was this idea that, yeah, this is how you are now. And that's what mindfulness is for. The whole point of mindfulness is to know yourself. That's what the Greeks talked about. Know yourself, not know your story. This is where I came from. This is where I was, and then I'm this, and I had that. That's not the point. Knowing yourself means seeing yourself as you are right now. Okay? We're walking down the street. You call me an idiot. I feel something immediately. Am I aware of that feeling, or am I just reacting to it? So most of the time, most of us, we're reacting because it's automated. We've learned it again and again. We've repeated this experience through life. It works for us. It's our comfort zone. Even if it keeps landing us in trouble, we do that. We keep going back to those troublesome solutions.
But isn't the other way also automated? In the sense that if I have road rage 5 times and, 5 times I go to jail for it for a month at a time, eventually on the 6th time, I better remember that I don't want to be where I was all those 5 times.
Yeah,
so I'm not going to have road rage. So that's also learned behavior in a sense.
Yes, you counter-learn. Yeah, you learn a new behavior to counteract it.
Right. So
but you can only do that.
It's always the same way.
But your initial behavior has to be conscious. You've got to know that you're doing it. Mm-hmm. And we don't. Most of what we're doing is unconscious. 99% of what we're doing is unconscious. The mind begins by regulating your heartbeat, your immune system, your circulatory, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And all this is unconscious, thank God. Okay? And the vast majority of what the mind does is unconscious. We can go from birth to death.
Unconscious.
More or less unconscious. We have to choose to be conscious. Mm-hmm. And if you go expecting that of people, you're going to be very disappointed. Because most people don't choose that. They choose the easy way. They look around. What's everyone else doing? That's what I'm going to do. They don't think for themselves. They can.
The norm. They choose the norm.
They choose the norm because it's safe.
Yes.
Okay?
That's what we want to break.
You think all those people who vote for Trump do it because they like Trump or they know it? They don't even know anything about him. Their neighbors are voting for Trump. That's why they do it.
Or social media.
Or social media. Well, they're their neighbors.
Yeah. Whatever it may be. Whatever form it may come in. So, okay, this is beautiful. And from this, you're saying that mindfulness, or what your break from Buddhism is essentially no more of the organized methodology of Buddhism as a religion, but a scientific approach, just how you explained the mind, working from the base all the way up. But that was a scientific explanation that you came up with. It wasn't a religious explanation. And so you placed the mind into the brain and you explored it through science, from the brain outwards. And through that exploration, you reached essentially the same space where Buddha reached, in what you explain at the end of the day about consciousness and unconscious behavior. But you did it not in the dogmatic way of religion, and also not in the dogmatic way of science that refutes the mind essentially, and narrows it down to just neurons and that kind of mechanism. But you combine the best elements of both to come up with a way where we can elevate mindfulness. Maybe not to the extreme that I'm hoping for, because I'm a crazy optimist.
Idealist.
Yes, I'm an idealist. The full end of it. But that's how I function. I always think there are no limits, right? So that's my idealism. And in this case, I want to reach the space where I want to have full control over my mind, right? Why can't I have that? That's the goal, I think, right? The moment humanity can be at that full consciousness space, we're in perfection, aren't we? Like, that is what perfection should look like, but it's impossible.
Well, there's a lot of shoulds in there, Ali.
Well, don't you think, being fully mindful resolves everything?
Well, I think it's a nice idea. I'm questioning whether it's possible. Fully mindful.
No, I don't think it's possible either.
Let's look at mind. Okay, mind, you talk about the mind. I do not believe in the mind.
Right.
I don't think there's any such noun. I think mind is a verb.
Mm-hmm.
It's what the brain does.
Right. Yes. It's the action of, yes.
It literally minds us.
Mm-hmm.
It minds our body. And then it takes further. We use it to mind our whole life, sometimes well and sometimes badly.
I've heard that before because, when I was studying philosophy, the Cartesian dualism was where the mind came into play. And then it diluted this whole space of creating the mind, and then whether it was science or capitalism or even fraud. I mean, a lot of these illusions and mind readers and mind plays and stuff of, previous centuries, even today, that whole industry is created on the idea of suggesting there is this entity of a mind that we just can't touch, so to speak, but we can reach. And a lot of, right?
That's because all religions are trying to be an antidote to death.
Yes.
And in order to be an antidote, the mind has to continue after death. So they've got to be dualistic.
Yeah. And that's one of the problems. That's why I don't like religion, because it tries to do that in a sense of this legacy format for the future where, Abrahamic religions, for example, heaven and hell and this judgmental God, or in Hinduism, the growth of your reincarnations and your castes and your growth and everything else, and Buddhism and many, even New Age religions use some form of this as well. But you're saying what I've heard one of my teachers say that really stuck with me then is, don't think as the mind in that sense, but think of it as the momentum or the activity that the brain induces through its chemical processes.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Okay, continue from there. Now I'm following you and I'm understanding.
Okay, but there's a problem in when we try to separate mind, when we try to separate body and mind. There's a problem right there, and that's the problem of language. The Buddha addressed that really, really well. He was very, very insightful in that way. So I'd like to backpedal a little bit and just introduce how I came to my present way of thinking from Tibetan Buddhism, which is all based on this idea of enlightenment. And, you work and work and you reach the goal, and then that's it. There's no more suffering. You know everything, and et cetera. And you're perfectly compassionate forever. So there are many schools of Buddhism. There are many cultures of Buddhism, just like Christianity or Islam or any of those. But there are two main divisions in Buddhism. You've got Northern Buddhism, which you've got Tibet, China, Japan, and Southern Buddhism. So Southern Buddhism is much more austere, and it's much more fundamental, and they really go back to the early scriptures. The Tibetans hardly ever go back to the early scriptures. They've developed their own literature, it's beautiful, it's compelling, it's insightful, it's got all sorts of stuff, but it's also full of mysticism. And it really is a religion, much more so than Southern Buddhism. Southern Buddhism focuses on the Buddha himself. And my fascination has been with the story of the Buddha, because I realized that all the teachings that you get, this is what Buddha taught, you see, well, he didn't actually teach like that. He didn't say, this is the Eightfold Path. This is the first and then the second. He talked about things in a sort of much more random way, and then it was pieced together afterwards. So I wanted to go back to that organic Buddha and read his stories and see what he had to say. He taught for 45 years, so there's tons of stuff. And it was in exploring that I started to understand his approach. And his approach is very simple. It's the scientific approach, trial and error. Watch your breath. What do you see? Watch your mind. What's happening? Get pissed off and angry. How does that feel? So it's not about making value judgments and telling you what you should be like. It's about seeing, what is this me right here, right now? So yeah, you can talk about modules of the mind, and you can talk about shoulds and shouldn'ts, but basically the key is to see how I am right now, how that reactivity is playing out in me, and what I can see, what patterns are in there which are causing me harm that I can start to change. And the key to change is seeing it. It's got to be conscious. because most of what we do is unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
It's subconscious. It's learned behavior, or it's instincts. Learned behavior described as learned instincts. They act as instincts. I learned to be defensive, but now it's so quick that, I throw a punch right away. So it's an instinct, but it's learned, which means it can be unlearned.
Mm.
And even some of those animal instinct behaviors, reactivity, they can be modified as well, but only when you've got your fingers on the control. You've got to see it happening in real time. It's not enough to say, oh, well, I'm stupid. It's this, what I'm doing right now is stupid. Oh, it's true. Okay. I'm falling flat on my face right now. Okay. I say this, I'm not sure I fully believe it, but I often say that the only way we really learn is by falling flat on our face. So to really take the lesson in and personalize it. So it's in that sort of learning that we get to change our behavior. We change our patterns, but that doesn't mean we're always going to get it right. But it does mean that we're going to learn from it, or maybe I'm going to be idealistic. It means that we can always learn from it. Mm-hmm. In a perfect world. But of course, it's not perfect. So sometimes we do learn and sometimes we don't. Sometimes I think, oh, finally, I've got it. I'm not like that anymore. The next thing you know, I see that behavior coming out again. So it's constant. You got to keep working. I do not believe that there is a point of enlightenment where you just don't fall back anymore. I think that is a sales pitch. Mm-hmm. It's a spin. It convinces people to become Buddhists. But as the Buddha said, okay, this is very important. When you enter the path, when you truly enter your own path, you become free of teachers and doctrine.
Yes.
It's you. You're relying on yourself. You have faith in your own ability to understand and to change and to grow.
I asked a monk this, exactly what you said. And he said, then how are you going to learn? You see what I mean?
Yeah, well, that's the thing.
That's the religious.
He's quite right.
Yeah,
he's quite right.
Then how are you going to learn?
I'm grateful to the Buddhists. I'm grateful to all those Buddhist institutions which kept all those teachings there so I could learn them. But I had to let them go in order to actually
advance and activate.
Yeah, and I think that's the key to everything. Faith in Buddhism, faith is it's temporary. It's you hold it. Well, yeah, I'm going to have faith in this guy for a while, and let's see if it works out. And if it does, then it's not faith anymore. Then it's knowledge. It's experience,
and it's growth. And you grow.
But if you're just faithful, because it feels comfortable and you feel consoled by that, then nothing's going to change.
And I kind of have this concept that if you're faithful, you're not getting the whole picture, because faith is essentially telling you not to question and to follow because it's somehow right. Whereas knowledge is telling you to go that path because you know, or you are learning of it, right? Yeah. Whereas, in the Abrahamic religions, from Judaism to Islam, they're very dogmatic in the faith aspect of it because that's what really generates the profits for the models. And you need to have faith to follow through with the systems.
I wouldn't blame that on the system. I would blame that on people. It's just the herd mentality.
But I mean, they can't allow you to have a growth model because then the institutions become secondary to your own inner cultivation. And so you no longer go to the church and put your money into a hat that passes around. You no longer go to the mosque and buy your sins and all these things, right? So in a sense, it kind of one hand washes the other. But I see where you're going with this. And I'm much more intrigued now because that's what happened to me. I used to live, so I was born into a Muslim family where my dad was very much what you're talking about now. He didn't believe in institutions or anything else. He just believed in certain moral codes, or he had an ethical value system of good and
social,
bad. Yeah,
social religion.
Yeah, social, right? And he just lived by that, right? And he had these beliefs of being a good person. And my mom was, still is, this very religious person in the sense of following a religion, right? That herd mentality that you said. And then I go on to, boarding school and other things and going to university in North America. And I get immersed into Catholicism in school, and then, Judaism, a lot of it in university. And then as I get further in my education, Buddhism. And there was a little bit of Buddhism in my younger years because there was just this one teacher who was a Buddhist, which we didn't have a lot of contact with because he was the martial arts teacher in our school. And so I got a black belt in Aikido. And he was teaching me the Buddhist way of how to use force, somebody's aggression against them without hurting them, by just subduing it and canceling it and all of that. So there was a lot of education there, which I didn't understand. He was teaching me the Buddhist way. I just thought this is part of the movements of my martial arts. Yeah, that was part of my Aikido, so to speak. I didn't understand the religion at that point. But as I grew up and went to university, I said, oh my God, he was telling me this when I was 9 years old. And so it stuck to me. And I started liking Buddha more as a person than anything else, because I said to myself, this person is onto so much more than so many people from the beginning of time that we have recognized to now, because we're just proving some of the theories that he had, or some of the ways that he trialed and errored his way into, a format. And we're kind of now just being able, with our tech and our science and our development in science, to say, actually, it's true. We don't need to keep trial and error it. It is true. And it's really fascinating that he does that. And then I try to tell people, you don't need to, because a lot of people are religious. I mean, more than half the world is religious. They practice some kind of religion, or they've called themselves some kind of religion. And actually, a lot more than half the world. But just half the world are Christians and Muslims. But I keep telling them, you can incorporate Buddha in your everyday, regardless of whether you pray 5 times a day as a Muslim or you go to church on a Sunday, because it actually will fortify and develop your religion, moving away from the institution and closer to that conceptualization of what you want to understand yourself as being in every moment of your being, which is the growth and the development. But I'm not too successful at convincing people. They think I'm trying to convert them to Buddhism.
Yeah, they're afraid.
Right? They're afraid of even saying the word Buddha. And why? Why is that?
Because religion is their biggest defense mechanism, and you're telling them to change it.
But it's for their own good.
You're scary.
You're
terrifying.
using tools that empower you. You love Jesus more, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah, but Jesus might not like it. I have to wait. Just wait. I have to go and ask my priest. Okay.
And guess what that answer is going to be?
Yeah.
So how do you?
I have a friend.
Right.
Just a side story. Not a friend, an acquaintance here in Montreal, whose son was going to a Catholic school. The priest was exposed as a pedophile. And
why am I not surprised?
A few weeks later, so that community sort of broke down. A few weeks later, she came to me and said, well, the school's starting up again, and the whole thing with the priest has been settled, and he's teaching again now. So you think it's okay if I send my son back there?
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And the school did start up, so that wasn't the only conversation that went that way. Okay? I love people. I didn't always. I've come to love them. Do I have faith in people? I want to.
Right. But Stephen, isn't that the point here? Isn't that the point? To somehow develop people into a knowledge structure where we don't have to have faith in them following another guru that this time may lead them to a better path. So, I tell people, look at the statistics, look at the probabilities. How many times have the Gandhis risen and actually ended up in freeing people from colonization? Or how many times have a Moses come up and freed slaves in history? Generally, that doesn't happen. That's why we have 10 stories in history and we memorize them in our history books, because, over 110 billion people have gone through the world, so the scientists say, and we have a handful of stories that we're proud of, right? Of big names, so to speak. And that's not to say that, people who didn't have those huge legacies didn't do anything, but the reality is the majority aren't functioning that way. So for us to sit back and say, I'm waiting for Jesus's return, or in Islam, another story, or in every religion has some story of this messianic, power coming back to save you. And all you have to do is follow it everywhere it goes all the time. And you can be brainless and brain dead. And I tell people, then why have the brain? Why exist? Like, what's the point of all of this if you're just going to be sheep?
Opium. We're back to Karl Marx. It's the opium of the masses.
Yes. And so how do you fix that? Because that's what Compassiviste is about. And that's the $1 million question for me. That's what Compassiviste is about, the power of the masses, not in that opium, but in the knowledge. So if everybody has the knowledge you have or other people have that have kind of surpassed this space, then maybe we may be onto something. Maybe we don't. And that's what social revolutions are about. They don't have to be violent, but they can be done through elections. They can be done through how we spend our dollar. They can collectively be done in so many ways to fix the problems we face.
I think we have to try. I think we are trying. I think people have been trying for a long time, but a small number of people. Mm-hmm. I often get asked, people used to come to my classes and they'd wait afterwards until I was alone. They come up to me and say, look, I really like your classes and it's great and it's doing me so much good. Could you have a word with my husband and convince him to come? No, I can't. I cannot convince somebody that they need to do this. They need to do this self-examination. There's no force on earth that can make somebody come to that decision except for themselves. Something in their life, and in my experience, that something has to be a kick in the stomach or a slap in the face.
Fall on your face.
A diagnosis of cancer, The
fall on your face that you said earlier.
Yeah. That'll wake them up.
That's the catalyst event.
I got to do something. Yeah.
Maybe you're right, because that's what happened to me. I was at the height of my financial world, and it was extreme. And the fear, my fall on my face was the fear of losing it all, not the money, but I reached a point where I had no more pleasure with the money. I couldn't buy anything more to give me pleasure. These moments of connected pleasures through thousands of dollars being spent every minute of it didn't do anything anymore. So it was either going into drugs or gambling, some kind of real crazy vice that would just destroy me. I recognized that because I saw other friends of mine who became extremely successful fall to those problems. And I was there kind of as the helping hand. And I went kind of through rehab with them a little bit. So I started learning the processes and seeing it in myself. That's when I walked away from everything. I quit my job. I quit my life, walked away from the money, and did that 2016 to 2020, 4 years of, I went through the old world. I went through the path you did. I went to Turkey. I went to Cairo. I went to so many different places in search of something, whether it was Sufism or, Buddhism. Give me something that I could do something with. And at the end, I walked away from all of them. Even though I appreciate a lot of them, I still walked away from all of them because I said, no. These are all soothing mechanisms that I kind of want to have faith in so that I can soothe myself. I don't need to soothe myself. I want to find a way that not only I can better myself and empower myself through education and activating that education, but also to do that with so many people that it can yield beneficial results at the end of the day. Because if I think back to, let's just say you, I, or anybody thinking this way, reach a peak of education and knowing themselves and all of those things. Does it really help when you open your door and you walk out and all of society is not there? It really, defeats the purpose for me a little bit, because I want the compassion to extend communally. I want it to extend globally, right? I want it to be better. I want the animals to be safer. I want children to be safer. I want people to be happier. I want that Spinozic joy is the greatest value to really come into play for people so that they enjoy life, so that, people experience happiness. And to do that, it has to be collective, like Marx says. It can't be personal.
Well, it's both. It's like, talking about inner peace. There's no inner peace without outer peace.
Yeah. So what do we do?
Vice versa.
What do we do? What do we do to
Well, you do what you do, and I do
that?
what I do. So you're working on the outside. You're hoping to transform political/economic structures or at least perceptions, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm working on one person at a time. Like, know yourself, look at your reactivity, learn how to change it, learn self-compassion, real self-compassion, so you can understand how to be compassionate to others. And so we need that from the inside. And then if you can walk out of that into structures which reflect those values, then we're changing the world. But you can't separate the two.
No.
And that's my big challenge is to rid people of this idea of inner peace. It's peace. It's not inner peace.
Right.
It's peace.
Right.
It's a big picture, not a small one.
And how are you going to exponentially multiply what you're doing or what people like you are doing? Because I fear that my idealistic self tells me to fear that, Stephen's 78 years old now. Stephen
72. Hey,
sorry, 72. My bad. 72. Stephen's 72 years old. And I said that because I'm turning 48, and I remember saying to you earlier that you're 30 years older than me. So that's where it came from. Sorry, 25 years older. So Stephen's 72. Let's say he's got 30 years. Okay. Eventually it'll stop. That's my biggest fear, that great minds that have, reached the space of being able to share this knowledge and share this passage that they have found that works, and what you're teaching ends with you, so to speak, right? In a sense. And that bothers me because I don't want it to end with you. Not only do I not want it to end with you, I also want it to exponentially grow. So in the time that you're around, imagine if Buddha had, 50,000 people who could, during his time, really learn from him, as opposed to, or Jesus, as opposed to saying there were 12 people around him and that was, all there was, that was the story, and they wrote the Bible and that's where it stops. Imagine if there was 20,000 people who could share those lessons, share what they saw, share the beauty that there was there. I think we can do a lot more, no?
I think we can. I mean, what you ask me what I'm doing to promote that? Well, I'm going on podcasts and trying to share my ideas. I'm doing marketing. I'm doing what the Buddhists did.
Yes.
They marketed the Buddha. And so I'm trying to market mindfulness and something in a way which makes sense to people today, which is scientific and secular and so on. So I'm just doing what I can. And I'm keeping my eye on the ball, not on some vision in the future. We do what we can and change happens, but you can't control it all.
No, you can't control it. You wish you could, you can't. But
look, democracy was just going to get better and better. And we thought the West was, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, we thought that's it. Man, it's all lights from here on.
It's heaven from here on.
And that is exactly because we believed that and we relied on it and we became complacent. We're in this situation today.
And now because we're enslaved to the capitalist dream, we're accepting oppression and a lot of the social problems.
Because nothing matters more than money.
Because now we're all in one religion, money. Money's God. The more money you have, the closer to God you are, essentially, because we worship our billionaires in a way. We've kind of gone back to the pharaonic times of the myths of, how they lived, where they were gods and they had all this, wealth and everybody else was a slave. And we're kind of going back to this methodology now with the oligarchies. But it's an economic concept, but it's a very social and religious concept too, because a billionaire can go on TikTok and feed you a whole diet of lies about what time they wake up, what they eat every day, and all those things, and why they're successful because of this routine. And regardless, I think grand majority of people will be willing to now take that up and follow it without without questioning, because one of the richest people in the world actually has McDonald's very often and actually drinks a can of Coke every day. And so, and he says this in many interviews, he says this so openly, right?
He's proud of it.
Yeah, he's proud of it. And I think to myself, okay, for some reason, your body didn't react to it. For some reason, you don't have cancer. I don't know. Maybe you're spending billions to counter that, or what it is you have access to. I don't know. But don't promote this to people. Don't tell people, have a can of Coke a day. That's not the right way to do it. But that's the religion we are in today.
Yeah, if you're a billionaire, then you're a genius.
Yes.
Which means everything you did was right.
Yes, because that's the value of life now, right? And that's really the problem. Our value of life has become monetary wealth. What amount of monetary wealth you have. And in a sense, we don't rank people as, like, if Jesus and Moses and Buddha and Muhammad and Martin Luther King and Gandhi, all those people existed today in one era, they wouldn't be famous anymore today, because they could not, they wouldn't fit. They could not be anywhere on that Forbes list. And if you're not ranked on that Forbes list, you just can't get following. It's impossible. I mean, you look at, you look at the most followed people, the most viewed people, the most interesting people, so to speak, in our society today. And it's somehow connected either to wealth or to extreme, just, out of context society. So like an extreme criminal or something really, really abnormal socially, outside our capacity to understand or to be willing to live in. And that's what we follow. But let me ask you this. So in your practice, do you think that people are able to maintain their dogmas? And I ask this very seriously, even though I'm laughing. Can they maintain their dogmas and still grow? Because I'm starting to think my idealism has gone too far in telling people, no. You can't believe in the stories that you've heard on your Friday sermon or in your Sunday church. You need to start coming back to a realism of understanding yourself and the paths that you can educate yourself towards. And you need to start losing that. Just like, you need to start healing from the trauma that your childhood and your father affected on you to be able to make these better decisions and choices and actions in your life. You have to heal from that. You have to somehow disconnect yourself from that pain. And I feel it's the same way with religion. You're raised over decades from a very, very young age, to follow certain structures that become almost innate to you as you grow up behaviorally, right? And now it's so hard to to tell someone to kind of balance that with education.
Well, now we get to the very core of the Buddha's message, which is all about identification.
Yes.
We identify this stuff. This is not something I learned. This is me. This is who I am. I am a Christian. I am a Jew. I am a Buddhist. Don't threaten me with that. Don't try and undo that. Keep your distance, okay? Because I'm not going to follow you there. I'm safe. I'm comfortable, and I'm right. And my future, my afterlife is guaranteed. Plus, I've got this whole community. I'm part of this whole town, which is, and if I stop being that, I'm going to be ostracized. I'm not going to fit in. The conversation's going to be awkward. I can't do that. So there's plenty of forces working against that. The forces of security and society, so it's hard. That's why we're so few. It is the hard road, and it hurts.
And the more you speak, the more depressed I become.
Instead of just running to your neighbor and just being enveloped in their arms, and that's not enough just to be comforted. But for many people, it is. It's not
Now,
enough for you and me.
what if, let me ask you this then. What if you can hold some of the parts of this that are constructive to betterment, so to speak, to social betterment, while educating yourself and following the way Buddha kind of...
In theory, there's no reason why not.
Right? Because I think to myself, some of those, like, I don't want to tell people hate on your religion, because, you know, the congregation of coming together on Sunday church is a beautiful thing. You know, once a week, the community comes together in one party room, and they have a good moral conversation that boosts your morality. Let's just assume that it's all on the up and up and everything's beautiful, and what they're saying is actually good stuff, right? It's not propaganda and all of that. But let's just say that the priest is saying good things. So that priest speaks, people like, oh, okay, this is beautiful. And people converge there and they meet each other, and maybe, they do communal things together. Maybe their kids are safer in a community where people know each other. And a lot of good things may come out of this congregation, right? And I think the origins of these religions really had those spaces for those good reasons. I mean, historically, the mosque was not a place of, developing extremism in children or building terrorists. The mosque was a place where exactly this happened. People came on a Friday. It was community building. It was the best of what could happen, right, for people. And today it's a different story. Not all mosques, but I mean, we see it. We see extremism happening at the mosque. So I'm not going to lie that it doesn't exist. But can we incorporate these things into the self growth that you're teaching and build these powerful communities, right? Instead of saying,
it's possible. There are people. There are religious teachers, there are Christian priests and bishops, and probably a few cardinals as well, who are actively questioning and challenging and admitting, well, my faith is shaky, and you see that you read that in the diaries of Sister Teresa.
Mm-hmm.
She wasn't sure if she really believed in God or not.
Mm-hmm.
She's like, what?
Yes.
Yes,
you're so right. Thank you. Yeah, you're so right. It is possible. And actually, some of the older stories begin that way as well in those questionings. I mean, going back to Abraham, whether in the Christian Judaic version or whether in the Islamic version, there was a lot of questioning. Even in Moses, there was a lot of questioning God throughout his journey, right? In the story, in the biblical story, even in the Quranic story, which is very similar. But there was a lot of questioning the whole time. Yet today, it's like, how dare you question? How dare you ask that question? You're only allowed to ask, I don't know, if I ate at 6 p.m. and I was supposed to eat at 6:05, have I sinned? That's what you should ask. That's what your worry should be. Not about asking the big questions. Those are given. Those are faith questions. You can't ask those. You just close your eyes and go with it. But whether you ate at 6:05 instead of 6, that's a major sin now. That's something you need to, sacrifice 5 sheep. And
there are two basic approaches to religion, personal approaches. And one is as a comfort and a consolation and a guarantee that you're going to, survive death. And the other is as a challenge. Like, so what's this person saying to me? What am I'm supposed to believe this? Why? And what happens if I do? And what happens if I don't? And that sort of thinking, which is good, but it's rare.
Yes,
it takes
rare.
Courage. It takes a lot of courage. It takes social courage, not just personal courage, but social courage, because you're going to alienate people. You're going to alienate yourself from people. The more you depend on that community, the harder it is to distance yourself from it, even in that way. I have friends who are still in Buddhist institutional lives. Some of them are still ordained. And some of them are able to function that way. They are able to ask questions and be honest with themselves in that community. And they're not entirely liked, but they're there. And they're changing those institutions from the inside. And I applaud that. I have so much respect for that, because I couldn't do that.
Right. I really like that too. I actually really like that too, because, I find myself questioning sometimes And I appreciate that I question, and I really applaud myself because I say, good for you, Ali. Like, you dared to question, and you dared to educate, and you dared to ruminate and meditate and think on this for long sessions and kind of come up with some sort of mechanism that really fits a more logical perspective on what you're thinking about than a dogmatic or something historical, or, like you said, what was in you, right? And so I really appreciate that about myself, but I can't teach it. What I can do is what you said earlier, the outer mechanism of it, that I can do. I mean, I am doing that, but I really wish, like you said, there were people like those people, and people like yourself. Like, if there were, 20,000 Stephen Schettinis out there and your friends who you were talking about, I think we would be able to really move this huge population to start looking at things in a better way.
There's a concept in all religions. I think all religions have it. It certainly exists in Buddhism and in Catholicism, Christianity, and the idea of merit, or maybe call it grace, is that you do good deeds and you're accumulating something.
Karma points.
It's sort of intangible, but there's something there. There's some momentum to what you're doing. And I'm not talking here about good deeds. I'm just talking about your life in general, that things accumulate and your experiences accumulate to the point where suddenly you realize that I can question this. I should question this. Why don't I question this? But it takes, like I say, it takes a lot of courage. So you have to reach that point. And all those little micro events in your life which propel you towards that point, I mean, you can't possibly trace them all, but somehow you reach that point where one day you're open to it and I can't do this anymore. I can't believe this anymore. And then the door opens. But it's painful.
Yes.
The Buddha described it as a process of disillusionment. Enlightenment is literally a way of letting go of your delusions. And you can't just give them away and be happy. Those are your illusions. You love them. It's painful.
And it's scary. I remember when I started questioning, I was waiting for God's wrath, because those are the two religions I grew up in, Catholicism and Islam. And they both tell you, if you question God, the wrath is coming. Like, I was literally, Stephen, I kid you not when I tell you, I would go down a flight of stairs and I would hold on to the railing with two hands going down, because I knew God was going to make me trip and I was going to go down the whole flight of stairs and be broken at the bottom as a lesson. But that was so engraved in me. It was so traumatic that I could not, pull that out of me. I could not disconnect from that. It took so long for me to be able to say, then I grew into a space that I was so happy. In that space, I would say, God, I feel so close to you now because I can question you and you guide me and I can ask questions and you let me get to a point with logic. And then I got into this really scary place, which is where you were saying, what Buddha was saying. I got into this space saying, wait a minute, the God that I'm speaking with right now, as I try to get to this space, is that same God that I was taught to believe in. It is not the real concept. It is not the tangible or something that I could logically explain, but I'm bringing the part of the illusion that I don't think is dangerous anymore. And I'm kind of refitting it into my model in a nice way, but I'm still believing in it. And that's where I started questioning. I said, how do I really get to the bottom of this? How do I, get to a space like Buddha or like, Jesus or whoever who was so comfortable in what they were saying and they believed it without any, because I mean, if Buddha was alive today and we could speak with him, he would speak it so comfortably and believe it.
What we have to let go, for a while I thought I was an anti-Catholic or a non-Catholic. And then for a while I thought I was a non-Buddhist or challenging Buddhist. And then I realized that my issue was not with any particular religion. My issue was with belief. Belief itself suspends judgment. So, okay, sometimes you got to do that. Sometimes you just have to get something done. Your boss tells you to do something and you don't understand it, but you have to do it. But once in a while, okay, but if that's your entire way of approaching life, then you're not developing critical thinking, you're not developing courage, you're not developing integrity or honesty, and all of those things are going to start weighing on you. That's there's going to be a reckoning. Maybe you'll die before that reckoning comes, but maybe you might wake up and realize that someone's slapping you in the face or kicking you in the stomach, and you've got to pay attention. So we can maybe nudge people towards that, but that's a painful thing to do. So
it is painful, but you got to go through that. It's like any training,
but you got to be open. You can't just go through it. It's not enough. You've got to be open to it.
Yes, you got to want to first, and then go through it. That's what it is. Yeah. That's what it really is. And
it's the wanting is the thing that you can't give people.
No, they have to. They have to
give
want
this lady her husband's attention.
Yes. And I give the example of what you just said with weight. I tell people, hey, you want to be healthier, you want to lose weight, right? But you're willing to go and take all these drugs that are dangerous, all these surgeries that you may die in, all those things, but you're not willing to jog and eat a healthier diet because that's painful and takes time and you have to maintain it. And, it's a process. You're not willing to go through the process. You want the pill. You want to go to McDonald's and have some scientific version of some kind of mechanism in your body that will shed fat as you're eating McDonald's. And this is the illusion of what's keeping you gaining weight instead of you suffering as you're gaining weight, because you're like, oh, but I'm taking these pills, I'm doing all this research, I'm going to all these different doctors, I'm having all these injections, and I'm still gaining weight. And no, just do the logical thing. Be healthy, jog. I guarantee you things will look better.
Yeah, but logic isn't enough. Logic's not enough to convince people.
No.
That's why, the mindful way to lose weight or change your diet, whatever it is. And incidentally, Margaret Mead famously said that it's easier to change a man's religion than to change his diet. Okay. I know I lost my thread. I shouldn't have been. So
the mindful way to lose weight.
Thank you. Yeah, the mindful way to lose weight is not to tell yourself, I can't eat, I must not, I've got to stop, this is bad, I shouldn't do this. Is you eat that chocolate. How do I feel? How is it actually making me feel? How much did I enjoy it? Okay, let me try again. Okay, just keep eating. Don't change your habit, but become mindful. Bring mindfulness to it and let that process happen. And you'll see at first hand, this is hurting me.
Right.
As soon as you see that you're hurting yourself, your mental, emotional immune system is going to kick in, start looking after you.
This is something I'm going to teach somebody I know.
Oh, okay.
Because they have McDonald's, right, all the time, and they're like, they have it, they're loving it while they're having it, and then when it ends, right as soon as it ends, like, oh, I should have never done that. This is so awful. I feel so bad now, and the regret kicks in, like it's so horrible. Yeah. And then a few days later, I'm like, you were just crying the other day about how you should. I'm never doing this again. What happened? Why? No, I can't. I love it.
See, the why is not the point.
Yes, exactly. That's what I'm learning now.
Why doesn't change anything.
Right.
That's why I'm always talking about theory and practice. Knowing it, understanding it doesn't really change much. Somehow he's got to bring his presence to that act of eating and especially to that act of regret and the pain that he's suffering. And how is he dealing with it? Is he pushing it away? Is he pretending it doesn't? How is he doing it? Look at all that and you'll see, famously, we cause our own suffering. I mean, the world hurts us. There's pain. But this sort of emotional suffering, this is the product of our own minds and our own experience. And we can change that. It's within our power to change it if you have the will.
Stephen, how can people join your class?
Mindfulnesslive.ca.
We'll put that down there in the notes.
Okay, or Schettini.com. It's the same website.
Okay.
And you can come, if you want, you can come for a trial. Just send me an email. There's a message on my website, and you get a free trial.
Take it from there.
If you like it, you come 3 times a week. Not everyone can come because it's at lunchtime. Mm-hmm. but people listen to the recordings. They get the recordings straight afterwards.
Okay.
So that's 3.5 hours a week, and that becomes like the backbone of your practice. And then you've got something to build on.
Perfect.
That's what's important, is doing it, not talking about it.
People, go to this website and please go to Stephen, because if Stephen can help you, then you come to Compassiviste, and then we can do the other side of it. And then together we have the whole piece that Stephen's talking about. And then we have a wholesome collective. We have a wholesome tribe, because we have this side of it and we have this side of it, and we can put into activation where we arrive at after you've put people on a path, and then we can kind of guide them through that. And the world, that's like Noah's Ark, that's what's happening. But we just gotta get the animals into the ark first. And I never got how Noah did that. And that's your part. That's not my part. My part is steering the ark. Okay. You need to get speak all the languages to get all the animals into the ark, essentially. Last question, because I can talk to you for days. One short sentence. What is the best piece of advice you could share with people? It could be in anything. It could be a recipe. I don't care. Your best piece of advice that just comes to your mind right away.
Get to know yourself.
Get to know yourself.
Love yourself.
Yes. Love yourself. Love yourself. We can close on that.
You know what? Better than love. Like yourself. Like yourself. I like being me. I like what I just did.
I prefer loving myself.
Yeah. Do both.
Okay. I'll love myself because
low self-esteem is at an epidemic level.
Yes,
these days because of social media.
And you know what? I become the weird guy because I don't have that. And so people sometimes say, it's overconfidence or like what. I'm like, no, I'm just comfortable with myself. I'm comfortable. I like myself. Like you said, I like myself. I'm free. I'm comfortable. I like myself. I'm happy where I am right now. I'm free in a way,
Cool.
So I really want people to reach that space. It's so beautiful being there. And I hope we can do that. Stephen, thank you.
I'd like to live in a world with more people like that.
Yes, that's what I want to try and do. That's what Compassiviste is about. So people, please go to Stephen so that he can help you come to Compassiviste and make the world a better place. That's really what it's all about here. Thank you, Stephen, for speaking on Compassiviste Dialogues. And thank you for sharing your insights and for continuing to guide others towards clarity and a deeper understanding of themselves and reaching that point of liking themselves and eventually loving themselves. You actually embody the true spirit of Compassiviste because you're someone who seeks wisdom not for personal gain because you've achieved that for yourself. You're at this place where you did your life and you've kind of reached certain levels, but then you turn around and you said, hey, it's not enough that I learned something, but in true Buddha manner or Jesus manner or Gandhi manner, I need to bring this to a global perspective so that, like you said, in the overall, we can be better. So see, Compassiviste is not a far-fetched idea. You're one already. So many people are Compassivistes.
I think it's fantastic. I really appreciate what you're doing and I respect it tremendously. And it's the other side of the coin from what I'm doing.
Thank you.
We need both.
Thank you very much for that. And your work in making mindfulness practical, essentially, and not some, mystical Buddhist thing or some kind of retreat event of wealthy people or anything like that. Thank you for making it really what it is and not the commercialization of it. Because whenever people say the word mindfulness, I stare at them first like, what are you going to say? Before I'm comfortable. Because God knows I've heard stuff that I'm like, no, but what can you do? Yeah. So thanks. That's an invaluable gift to people, the truth of it that you're bringing. To our audience,
the truth is right there for us to see.
Yes, and you're helping people see it. You're opening people's eyes to it. So thank you so much for that.
Good. Thank you, Ali. Thanks for all you're doing. And thanks for having me on the show. It was great.
You're welcome. Anytime.
Really appreciate
Anytime.
it. Okay.
I'm sure we'll have more conversations like this soon as well.
That's great.
To our audience, please subscribe to Compassiviste Dialogues channel and share this episode, because we want to get as many people in the world to Stephen's website so that, we can start this social revolution. That's what it is. This growth, this evolution, this next evolution is happening this way. It's not with guns. It's not, like the Bolshevik revolution. It's not like, Castro's revolution. It's none of that. It's here. It's this collective love growing. We'll put all the links down there for Stephen and his website and how to get to his courses and his links so that you can reach it. And thank you for joining us today. We're here to help change the world together. I'm Ali Horiat.